looking at the future, I think is really important. I think as a industry in general, we spend a lot of time focusing on like this moment, and almost like the past, and we don't spend a lot of time looking at the future and proactively designing our businesses and our services for the future.
Hmm.
And I think one of the there's so many problems. Okay. I think one of the biggest problems is that we're totally the funeral space is totally misaligned with the customers.
How
And
so?
a part of that has to do with this departure from religion and spirit. Yeah, basically a departure from religion and the rituals of the past. A part of
Mhm.
it has to do with something as basic as terminology. Like nobody wants to go to a funeral home. Like funeral home is like the worst word. It's like so bad, but it's like it's a hard problem though because it describes the business so specifically, and so it's
Yeah.
hard to come up with a new term. So it's not entirely the industry's fault. It's like it's a combination of things. And what was your question? What's the biggest challenge right now?
Well, yeah. So, like, what do you think? I mean, what do you think is really important to the future of our business? What do you think is critical for funeral businesses to do or to implement in order to not just be successful, but to be able to continue, right? To be able to continue to serve families.
Yeah. um so here's my personal opinion.
Yeah, that's what
my,
I want
my,
to hear.
my personal opinion is that in the next, I'm going to say 25 to 30 years, maybe 30% of all funeral homes are going to close. I don't think we need funeral homes. And I think, we need a funeral director to sign the paper and we need somebody to pick up the bodies. But I think funeral homes are pretty irrelevant. And I think they know that, which is why they've put in protectionist legislation for the last 100 years.
Yeah.
And we're at a moment right now where everyone's figuring that out. And the funeral industry is pretty fucked, in my opinion. And it's going to be a fascinating 10 to 15, 20 years ahead of us.
Yeah.
Um, the successful funeral homes are going to go in two directions. They're going to be hyper specific to religion, religious ritual, and they're going to target religion that is not going to, there's going to be a percentage of the population that's not going to leave this really strict ritual.
Right.
That's going to be 1% of funeral homes that are successful. The other percentage is going to be the ones that cater to the religiously unaffiliated, the people who don't want to go into a funeral home and see a
Right.
pews and crown molding, and they don't want a pastor, and they don't want it to be called a funeral home. They don't want to talk to a guy in a suit or with a tie, or a girl in a suit with a tie. They want to talk to somebody casual and like
Right.
human that they can trust. I think the successful funeral homes on the other side are going to build that experience from the ground up to be something completely different from what we know today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. One of the firms that I worked with is in Houston, Texas, right? So, heart of energy and gas, kind of corridor in business. Also, huge technology hub, at least in the South and in Texas. Lots of business, lots of corporations. And I worked at one of the top firms, and I was always amazed with how many clients said, we don't want all that stuff. We don't want a pastor. We don't want this big kind of solemn religious ceremony. Money's not an issue. We want to do what we want to do, but we don't want to do what you think we want to do. And so it was this constant kind of really learning experience for me, and understanding, they want the conference calls, they want to do arrangements, by phone or by email or by their smartphone even. They want to have exactly what they want, even in an online experience, but they want it in a way that is respectful and that's sensitive and that's not just some Costco business model. Um, so
Yeah,
I have to agree with you. I think a lot of the secularization of funeral homes is just really where it's at in a lot of ways.
I like what you said too, that they're still spending money, because they are. There's a lot of money and they want to spend the money. We're just not giving them the funeral homes are not presenting options to them in the way they want to spend money, which is why they
Exactly.
go and they rent out a bar to
Yes.
spend. That's really simple, and like we see it over and over and over. Yet we continue to like not move in the direction of event centers or liquor licenses. And that's an easy 2 grand to 3 grand extra that you could tack on
Oh,
to a
minimum.
funeral.
Yeah, the firm that I worked for, they had just remodeled and built this beautiful reception room with like a baby grand piano. We had catered services all the time, and really the name of it was, "Are you going to have a reception and a celebration?" It was, "Let's decide what your celebration looks like," and
Yeah,
it was fun for me as a director because you get to customize, you get to know people and really, do something that's personal to them and be creative and literally think outside the box or the urn sometimes as it were. But yeah, absolutely. And I think the next wave of that, because I feel like a lot of funeral homes that I see now do kind of offer those receptions. They do offer catered services, even if they're minimal, or even if they are at a church or something. I really think the next wave is going to be technology that's for families, not just for directors, but technology that families can use to memorialize their loved ones. Video tributes were a huge thing. Kind of the new thing now is, of course, crowdfunding for funerals and for services, which is awesome. I think the next wave is really going to be about kind of space age, so to speak, solutions. Like, that's part of what excited me about Parting Pro. I saw their virtual ID confirmation system.
hmm,
Um, and at first, I'll be honest, I was kind of skeptical, and I had the funeral director response, which I was kind of put off. Like,
yeah,
this is so tacky. They're showing me a cartoon of Mickey Mouse, and like that's supposed to be somebody's loved one, and just, really, I pushed back from it. And so I decided to kind of test my own theory, and I showed it to a few of my friends who were not in the business. And I
yeah.
said, I want to take y'all's temperature on this. Just tell me what your initial thoughts are. And I showed it to them. Everybody went ape shit, seriously. Like, they just like, one person even cried, and she was like, if they had had this for my grandpa, and it would have saved us from having to go in, it would have saved us from having to like build this whole thing up in our head of seeing him and of doing this that we didn't want to do, and we told them we didn't want to do it. If we could have just all been together, like in the comfort of our home, doing this on a computer, it would have been a game changer. And really, when I heard that perspective from non-industry people, uh, that's when it kind of clicked for me. And I said, this is what our families think. Some people might be weirded out by it. A lot of people might really like that it's an option, and they might really like to have that relief of being at home and doing this. So I think that's the future personally, is those kind of solutions that seem a little bit outlandish now and like seem a little bit kind of crazy now, but really it's gonna be the way that things are gonna go, um, just moving forward.
Yeah, I'm on board with all that. I mean, the digital revolution's not going to go the other direction.
No.
So yeah.
Absolutely. So what do you I guess my last kind of question wrapping up, how do you, if you were talking to mortuary students today, so brand new people coming into the funeral business, maybe that they have family experience like I do, maybe they don't have any, what would you say to those brand new funeral professionals coming into the business in 2018 and embarking on their careers?
Well, I think the biggest challenge they're going to have is I think the young people know the future and the old people are resistant to the change. And so their biggest challenge is going to be communicating value to the older ownership. Um, like recently, I was talking to someone who said, so at Connecting Directors, we put out this ebook of our favorite biodegradable urns.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's pretty basic and like not that innovative. I mean, they've been around, right? And it's like
Yeah.
clear that people are buying them. And she told me a story of her friend who took the ebook to her boss and was like, "Hey, I want to get one of these biodegradable urns for our showroom." And the person was like, "Absolutely not. Like, this is going to scare our customers
Mm.
and it's going to plummet our sales and this is going to offend them and we can't do that."
Mm.
And like, that's insane.
Yeah.
And that's going to be their biggest challenge. And as soon as these older people start to retire, which is like 15 or 20 years, there's going to be some really fast, massive changes. But the biggest challenge for them is going to be communication. That's my opinion. And
Yeah.
if they can effectively communicate and kind of incrementally prove like that they're right, like let's try one urn and then it sells,
Yeah.
you know, that's a statistic that you can't argue with. And then they have to be like, okay, like that's sold, I guess we can get like two then, you know. And if you can like incrementally prove that you understand the customers
Mhm.
maybe better than they do without telling them directly that, I think that's going to be
Right.
really effective. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. So I'm a fourth generation director. I remember going to my grandparents' house and they had bells in every room that
uh,
would ring when a certain phone line would ring, which meant there was a first call. So anywhere in the house you could hear these bells and they would get in the old ambulance and go and make the call. So that's my context, right? But
yeah, yeah.
as a 30 something funeral director now, trying to communicate with the older generations about these changes like you're talking about, you have to be very tactful, and not just tactful, you have to be sort of patient and sort of understated with your strategy. So you hit the nail on the head. You can't just go to your ownership and say, this is what we need to do, it's going to cost this much money, you should do it right now. Because if they don't laugh you out of the room, they're going to think that you don't fit with their business model and that you don't fit with their families. um, I agree with you that communication is a huge issue, and it would really be nice to be able to see kind of both sides come to the table, right? The young people, so to speak, don't have to be quite so I don't know what the word is. You have to understand the context, I think, that the older generations are coming from. And I think
Yeah.
you also have to appreciate that on a very basic level, they are concerned about their own relevance and their business's survival.
Mhm.
As much as you may want to make this big push and whatever for your funeral home to have an Instagram, so to speak, the ownership in the back of their head is thinking, I got to stay relevant for the next however many years. And oh, by the way, pass that on. There's a compromise that can happen. And a lot of times, what I try to talk to older generations about, especially with like Parting Pro or people who call about Parting Pro,
Uh-huh.
is like, look, I get where you're coming from, right? But nobody's asking you to nobody's asking you to shed your morals or to shed your service model or to like
Right.
change who you are on this fundamental level. Your service is still going to be there for your families. We're trying to amplify it, and we're trying to bring solutions to the table that return you to your family instead of that stack of paperwork on your desk that's just sitting there for a week. So
Right. Yeah. And I think the key is incremental
yeah.
growth or incremental changes and statistics.
Yeah.
And so it's like, okay, we got 5 reviews last month and we moved 1 spot up on Google. Like that's small, but that's a really big deal. Or like we got 2 biodegradable urns and within the first month we sold 1. That's a really big deal. So like tiny incremental, like tiny goals, incremental growth, proving things over time. I think that's how change is going to start to happen. And it is the young people's. It's the young funeral directors. Like it's in their hands now, right? It's their
Yeah.
kind of responsibility to like usher this in, and it's not easy. And this isn't the only industry that's struggling with getting older generations to evolve, and like see the value in that evolution. And there is, I totally understand their perspective and the young people's perspective. And there's this whole like like those millennials are ruining everything. Uh, but ultimately, I think, yeah, I think it's going to be it's going to be collaborative. It's going to move things forward. It's just going to take a little time.
Yeah. So that just it made me think of another question. So I know I said the last one was my last one, but maybe this is my last one.
Cool.
What would you say if you were like a third party, okay, and you're seeing this young funeral director come to the table with, say, a product like Parting Pro that really is not incremental change, it's a pretty substantial change, right? Um, this young person's coming to the table with Parting Pro, they're meeting with their ownership or leadership or firm management and really trying to say, look, this is the way to grow our business and keep us sustainable. And you kind of see the ownership maybe taking a little head tilt or a little eyebrow raise. If you were a third person in that room, what would you say in that situation? How would you react?
I mean, I would take the same statistical incremental growth strategy, and I would encourage if I was the funeral director, I would be like, cool, yeah, I'm totally on board with this, but you have to prove it to me before I'm going to give you any money. So you give me 1 month to prove this, and if you can increase my statistics, I'm on board.
Got it.
That's
Okay.
that's kind of, I don't know if it's something I could say as a third party to like convince anyone of anything,
Yeah.
but from a funeral director's perspective, you can't argue with hard numbers, and like that is the thing that makes, in every industry, that's the thing that changes minds.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, do you have anything else for me while we're